Hi, friends. It's Sienna Williston with Our Blooming Catholic Life. And yes, on this channel, we have a lot of discussions about Franciscans, secular Franciscans in particular, but also sometimes some of the other third orders within the Franciscan family. But some of these topics really apply to a lot of organizations. And so when I was a little hard on the Instrumentum Laboris, You Are Love, for the upcoming general chapter of the Secular Franciscan Order, it's really a call to all Christian organizations. I'm not just judging the secular Franciscans in particular. They are one example. But even in the last Instrumentum Laboris was on how do we organize ourselves internationally, and it's not an easy thing. I think if you look at page 13, some concrete problems, even if you're not a Franciscan, you're going to hear a lot of these same echoes in your other organizations. So one is a lack of collegiality, and it even says dictatorship of the ministers with 3 exclamation points. So if you think I'm being overly dramatic, you may need to look at some of these. It's not just me. These documents are dramatic. These are real problems. And it says here, this is probably the most frequent problem in the order. The problem exists not only because there are ministers who think they are entitled to have absolute powers, but also because there are counselors who are convinced that the minister is responsible and empowered to do everything, or simply have no intention to get involved to serve. The solution in the problem entirely resides in the full compliance with our rule and general constitutions. It says we've already dealt with this in this report. 2, counselors who do not accept interferences of the ministers and the councils. This is due to individual personalities, lack of conversion, and ignorance, but also to the fact that the election of individual candidates, this is now the prevailing fashion, by the chapters gives the wrong impression to these people that the chapters have conferred to them a direct and personal mandate, and as a consequence, they presume that they are only responsible directly to the chapters and not to the councils. This is completely wrong. A methodological and mature reflection is needed to eliminate this serious error. 3, chronic lack of financial resources. We still adopt a financial contribution system from national fraternities that has proven its inefficiency and the impossibility to produce improvement. We have virtually no other source of revenue. 4, exhausting workloads for those who, in the councils, really commit themselves to serve their brothers. This situation produces exhaustion, physical and mental. I don't think that needed to be in quotes. We've all met ministers who have burned themselves out in people who are seriously committed to serve, and it causes significant problems to individuals in the whole fraternity. It causes a loss of sense of responsibility in the other members of the council and of other fraternity members. It favors possible authoritarian management, which mortifies fraternity and collegiality. I think a lot of these tie in together, and it could be that a certain personality type also seems to take on the leadership roles, whether by voting or that they're the only ones really nominating themselves or accepting nominations. And so perhaps we need to look at that. If it's only, I'm going to get it wrong. It's over there. The logistician kind, the kind who has a strong love for an authoritative structure and feels it's their duty to do all the work. If that person is always lifted up into leadership, we're going to always have the same problems. So we may need to step back. Maybe it's time to look at some of those things. Who are the people coming up into the leadership positions? If it's only one personality type and this is a weakness of theirs, we may want to look at how we can help balance our brothers and sisters in leadership, because a lot of these problems, okay, not the money one, but a lot of these come from the same places. Chronic lack of financial resources. Probably elsewhere it talks about why those financial resources are needed. There's no reference there. I wish there was a reference back. Some of them do have references back to other ones. But I'd like to see why they need those financial resources. And if we can't come up with means for doing that, it could be something that we do in Lent. Maybe we raise more money, as part of our almsgiving to the church. We could do that for some larger projects. There could also be, and I'm saying this in the nicest possible way, I think International ignores this, but they're completely frustrated and discouraged by it. While we don't have a habit or a uniform, so many people go out and buy things. This is a Franciscan sweatshirt. This is for a ministry, a charity of the Friars Conventional. I know people that buy things off of all different kinds of friars to support their charities, right? And as well as people will go on those automatic sites that do things for you. Zazzle is one that comes to mind, but there's a number of them that will produce on-demand things for you that bear the logo. It will even say Secular Franciscan Order. It'll have the towel on it. It'll have the 3 knotted rope. And yet, none of that's official. That is a huge market that is tapped into. People buy hats from these companies, tote bags, sweatshirts, t-shirts, polo shirts. I've seen people in embroidered jackets. And I know the Secular Franciscan Order is not getting a cut of any of that money. And that's ridiculous. I'm not saying we should have a uniform, but if people are going to buy them, why aren't we the ones selling them? That is a huge market for things out there, as well as we know people buy Franciscans gifts, little tchotchkes and things with Franciscan logos and whatnot on them. Again, that is a market if people are buying them. It's one thing that we don't have our logo copyrighted, but why are we not taking advantage of the fact that we're buying these things ourselves anyway? Why not have them available to our own members to buy and wear? It may not be a huge contribution, but it's something. Somebody's already making money off us. Why isn't it us? I'm just throwing that out there. And then 5. Oh, we know this is also crazy. Insufficient or no involvement at all of non-elected members in the activities performed at all levels. Again, 3 exclamation points. We know this happens. But this is one of the reasons, number 1, you may not want somebody super authoritarian in charge, but also you probably want to have some committees. Each person on the council could have a committee underneath them for different events and then involve people. Here's one of the things that I think is huge. It seems that in order to be involved, you have to take everything on your shoulders. It's an all or nothing thing right now. So number 1, people aren't getting trained in the leadership roles. I've heard there's a dearth of forms and paperwork that only the minister can do. That's crazy talk. Because then the minister is completely overwhelmed. So there should be a way, maybe the minister can make a council of paperwork or a committee for paperwork, or, everybody could create a committee. The treasurer needs to have a second person counting the money with them anyway. And then that would be a second person at least that understands the process, and that if the treasurer has to be absent, that second could come up. I would suggest there's a third so that you always have those 3 there. So at least 3 with the treasurer. I know some fraternities are terribly, terribly small and this would not work. But I'm saying for your larger fraternities, there's no reason that everyone shouldn't be on some committee or another. And that also helps the newly professed and the candidates really get their feet wet. I'm not saying make the candidates, a voting member and putting everything on their shoulders, but let them be on the committee and have some input and see what it's like. So they're seeing what real fraternity life is like. If they just keep seeing ministers get burned out after burned out, the second they're professed, they're out of there before you can elect them an officer. And then we have all those people out there in the wild that aren't in any fraternities. And let's admit, that's a huge problem. The disenfranchised, so the disfraternized Secular Franciscan. There's tons of them out there that aren't near a fraternity or who are living outside fraternity because they couldn't get along with the structure. So this one here says the structures must always rely on the best possible competencies, ability, experience, and availability to serve in all the fraternities, even if provided by non-elected members. The elected members will always have the final responsibility in the wise coordination of all structures, and that is in the General Constitution's Article 30.1. And again, this is an opportunity to have Catherine of Sienna Institute, I want to say, has gifts of the Holy Spirit discernment, where you figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are. You could also be doing like a Myers-Briggs personality type. There are so many of those out there. You could find one, possibly that's free, or perhaps your spiritual assistant can help you in this, help your people discern where their strengths really lie and where it would be great for them to serve, areas that are challenges for anybody on the council, and try and balance that with somebody who has a strength in that area, right? Does that make sense? So even that way, even if you have a weakness, you're not going to be afraid to take leadership, because you know the fraternity is going to find somebody with a strength to complement your weaknesses, and your strengths are probably going to complement their weaknesses, and you're going to be more fraternal. That's what we're looking for, right? And it's not just in secular Franciscan fraternities. We know this across the board, and you may call your person a chaplain instead of a spiritual assistant, but this is a moment to bring that in. You could have a retreat every couple of years where you have some spiritual directors come en masse and do some spiritual direction for the day as well. Maybe call in some local chaplains, like get a whole bunch of chaplains together at the state level or something and bring them in. I don't know what that looks like, but I think it's a really super duper idea. Even I know the Archdiocese of Baltimore is using it right now. It was called Ablaze Ministries. They may have changed their name a tiny bit because there was a similar name out there. They have a book called The One Best Thing that they use, and they have something that's like a personality type, but it's for the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so it's like a personality type, but it's very specific to the Catholic Christian life. And that kind of thing could be very available to you because it's almost a do-it-yourself book. And once you buy the book, you have accessibility to a whole bunch of online resources. So that's another really great resource out there. Let's see. Lack of permanent structures to support the essential government functions and the fundamental activities of the order. It basically is, you want streamlined structures to guarantee there's continuity and accomplishment, fair distribution of workloads. So you kind of need something that's more level across the board. Otherwise, you're going to have where each person comes in, they do their pet project, and then they leave. Pet projects and pet people are always a problem in every organization. There's always that little darling who gets whatever they want. And there's always that one project that nobody can touch. Even if the project is no longer feasible or working out, you're going to commit to it because you've always done it. And maybe you need to tweak what you're doing. Or, like if it's a really big project in another country, maybe their needs have shifted. You may need to check in with them every now and then. Do you still need us to buy 50 chickens for you every year? Is that still something you need, or are you hatching enough of your own now? Maybe we need to buy you some seed to plant a crop, or do you need water storage? What do your needs look like now? I know we've always given X, but what do you need this year? As well as you may be able to still do X, but maybe not in that same location anymore with that same charity. Maybe you need to revisit doing it in another place. And that is a great conversation to have. Probably have a committee to kind of suss that out first and then bring it to the group in large. And that can establish some continuity as well. Yes. Kind of says sometimes what happens is when there's one group in power and they have everybody helping them, and then they leave, and then that whole group of helpers leaves as well. No, don't do that. Try and provide some continuity. I'm not saying you should stay in the same office or on the same committee for the rest of your life, but don't change the same time the officers are changing. Maybe do it, in an off cycle or something. That would help. Self-isolation and excessive localization in the parishes or local communities, persisting dependence on religious. And that's all it says there. So you're going to want to reach out and make partnerships with other fraternities. The persisting dependence on religious is not developed, so I'm not entirely sure what they're describing there. The next one is substantial lack of well-prepared and available persons. This is one of the reasons we can't create valid and lasting structures is because people don't know how to help. And then you seek outside help, and then those people aren't trained in the ways of your organization, And that leads to a whole nother issue. So again, that's where having committees and involving people at the lower levels lets them get to know your organization better and to grow into roles so that by the time they get elected in, they have a better sense for how things are done and why, what works, what doesn't work. You've got to let people in on the leadership in the little ways. And when you step down, still, okay, take a little bit of time to breathe, but then you may need to be on a committee. And you may not need a lot of time to breathe if it's done properly and you had proper support in your role. When you step down, you should not be exhausted and completely burned out and wanting to leave the order. Like that's not what, there's a sign that something's crazy wrong there. It talks about then, oh my goodness, fraternal and pastoral visits. It says it's usually very short-sighted interaction between the two levels. They don't keep an open line of communication in a lot of places. I do know down in, is it the Five Martyrs region that's down in Florida? I believe this is the one I'm talking about. They have created something called families. So within their region, they have clusters of fraternities that work together on things under each counselor. And so that allows for more collaboration, which again, takes away, you're not isolating, your fraternity isn't as isolated either. There's more collaboration, sharing of talent, what works, what doesn't work. That really leads to the sustainability, right? So I love that family idea. I think that's the Five Martyrs region. It's down in Florida. They do that well from everything I've heard. Then we have here insufficient involvement in church structures and dynamics. And then it's saying that's from the General Constitution's Article 62.2 in several places in there. I don't see anything else here, and I didn't print out the General Constitutions. I don't have a copy. Sorry, I used to have it by my bedside, and it disappeared, and I'm not sure where that is right now to look that up. But that's in 62. But I do think we need to offer our services to parishes every now and then, at least let them know that we're here. And should they have a great need arise, feel free to call us and we'll see what we can do. But we can only help them out if we have a solid footing ourselves. So we have to make that solid footing as well. But it does say local and diocesan in general. So we should be helping out in the parishes that are in our area, especially the places where we meet. But also to let the archdiocese or diocese know we're here, like we exist. So should they have a vocations day or have an event, I don't know, where they think a particular group would fit in, they have to at least know you exist. So letting them know about that. The next one, 11, is insufficient interaction in concrete and operational terms with the rest of the Franciscan family, lack of shared objectives and activities. Yes, exactly. Franciscan family is huge. We talk about that all the time, and there's a lack of working together. And I'm going to call us out here as well. I know a lot of the other third order seculars, by which I mean like the third order Franciscans, the Confraternity of Penitents. There are a lot of other third order groups that are made up of mainly lay people, and the secular Franciscans as a whole have no interest in them. Why not? We could learn so much. And we're talking about having a lack of resources and a lack of people. How wonderful it would be if we perhaps have retreats together or pull some things together to get speakers or to do a work day together even. If we all pulled together, we could do some really amazing things, even though we're following different rules from different historical periods in the third order. I think it'd be lovely. Go do something with the TORs. Both the men and the women's religious orders. Why aren't we doing more together as a family? I think, we talk about the Franciscan family chaplet, and it does exclude those other third order groups. Freaks me out a little bit, but we all need to be a family and pray for each other's vocations and increase in holiness. We should be doing that all the time. Vertical and horizontal communication in the order. This gets a lot too. I'm not going to talk about that. That's something that I'm not sure what to do with that one, but they did develop that one a lot more. Lack of understanding of the nature and relationship with the young Franciscans, the Euphra, and lack of assumption of responsibility to Euphra. I think every group has that. Almost every group out there has issues with, they almost all have some sort of program for youth involved with them, whether it's the Knights, the Catholic Daughters, like most groups have a youth component as well and don't interact well with them necessarily. And so we're always looking to improve that, right? Because we want to be of service to our young ones and make sure that none are lost. Right? That's pretty basic Catholic teaching. So I know I can be really hard on the Secular Franciscan order in particular, but I want everyone to know how much I do love being a Franciscan. I love being a Catholic. I love being a Christian. And I'm sorry if sometimes I just get so frustrated with all the stupid nonsense that goes on in our organizations. You know, we always say they will know us by our love, but there's so much infighting and nonsense. And I really do think that if we put God first, a lot of these things fall away. So, you know, even we have priests trying to cause trouble saying, well, things Jesus never said. Only help the poor if they're from your own country. Oh, like, oh, he slammed you. He got you there. Good. No. Like, everybody wants to help the poor, whatever their country they're from. But how we want to help them, what we think is best for them, it is different. Some people say we need to give them food. Some people want to give them a job. Some people want to improve the conditions in their home country so they're not fleeing it. They're all valid things. And until we start listening to each other, I think we're going to have problems. And I think that's one of the huge problems with even church services right now. There are people who really think the argument over participation. This was a huge thing with Vatican II. People said they weren't participating enough in the Mass. The laity needed to participate more, that the clergy were the only ones growing in holiness. And that's complete nonsense. But people weren't properly taught. So if you weren't taught Latin and your entire Mass was in Latin, that kind of sucked. Like, let's be honest, it would be difficult to enter into the prayers of the church if you didn't know the language they were speaking, which is actually one of the reasons I want Latin back in, because everybody can just learn one language. If we all just learn Latin, you could go to Mass anywhere in the world and know not only basically what they're doing, but you'd know the words and could pray along. We could all pray the rosary together if we just all knew Latin. And that's just a couple of prayers. That's not even that much to ask, right? And so if we kind of all get on the same page a little bit. And so when somebody says, I really have this thing I want to do, and it's this, and you're like, I disagree, but here's why. This is what's on my heart. So instead of saying, well, Jesus said this, Jesus would have done that. Jesus didn't say that. St. Francis did this. St. Francis didn't do that. Let's say, you know, it's really on my heart. It breaks my heart. For an example, a lot of people go vegetarian because they think of St. Francis and his relationship with the animals. But the fact is, St. Francis ate meat. So you don't go, well, St. Francis never said that. Like, you're a loser. Don't you know anything about St. Francis? Ugh. Be like, oh, I understand why you're saying that, because St. Francis had such a love for animals. So let's go back and look at some of the documents and see what he says, because he actually talks about eating meat in the earlier documents. And what was his relationship with the animals? I've heard it posited by one of a Franciscan speaker recently, that was as Francis grew in union with Christ, the more his daily conversion and love of Christ and God transpired, right? More he turned, more he became like Christ. Remember, he became so like Christ, he bore the stigmata. The more he became like Christ, the more creation was drawn to him. That's something to think about. And like we talk about, St. Anthony grew so much like the Virgin Mary in his devotion and obedience, and in his faith that the baby Jesus would crawl up into his arms, right? And so, oh, okay. So it's not just that St. Anthony loved babies, right? But we have to explain these things in kind of a gentle way. And sometimes there is a clear answer, and sometimes they're not. It's all solutions may actually be valid. Like when I was talking about that charity thing, They may all be really good options. And what are you going to do there? Well, if you've been treating each other with listening and vulnerable listening as well as vulnerable sharing the whole time, it should be easy to say, okay, well, these are all great ideas. Maybe you have 3 or 4 and you don't have money to give to all of them. Let's give to this one this year, and next year we're going to revisit these other 2 and see what we think about them. Maybe we can do those next year, or maybe keep them on the table, and if we can raise more money, we'll do the next one, right? We'll come back to this discussion. Does anybody have an idea for a fundraiser, like what that looks like, how we could do that, what resources we would need, right? And to avoid the pet project thing, you're going to have to really work with each other. If something is really super on somebody's heart, but they're forcing the group, and the group doesn't necessarily want to do it every year. If it keeps coming up and being a point of contention, you may say, that is an amazing project, and I'd love to see you work more on it. But maybe we need to table it for this year. Or maybe can you go and think of more fundraising ideas so that we can do that one as well as consider some others? So we may need to be more creative. Or can we seek some sponsorship to get another organization to help chip in so that we can start incorporating some others? We may need to revisit that one, right? And you can say, oh, but we've always given to this. And it would break some people's heart to lose it. Maybe it does, but you'll find out that support if you really put it out there to like a private vote, right? A secret ballot, like who absolutely wants to do this project. This is our top priority. Is it? If it really is the heart of the majority of the group, then I say, you may want to go for it. But you may want to look at some funding and say, okay, we also need to come up with some new initiatives to make sure we're really responding as things are changing on the ground and the conditions of people around us, right? Does that make sense? Does all of this make sense? I don't want people to think I'm harsh. As somebody said recently, why are you picking on the Franciscans for saying that they're love and that they're the hands and feet of Christ? And I want you to know it's because if you're joining, so there's reasons not to join the Secular Franciscan order. If you're joining it because you love because you love animals, it's probably not the group for you. There's probably a group that works for environmental causes that you would be much happier in. If you're joining it just to do service work, charity work, well, you know what? There are a lot of groups whose main focus is charity, and that may be a better fit for you. If you want to grow in holiness in the way that St. Francis did in his model, this is the group for you. And that primary goal is loving God. And that we live in fraternity to help each other grow in holiness. That's our real goal. Now, of course, if we're really growing in that love and our fraternity is healthy and we're really helping each other to grow in holiness, those apostolates are going to happen on their own. We don't have to come in with that agenda at all. That's naturally going to happen. Somebody's going to see a need, or a need is going to just fall on your doorstep, and people will be like, can we help with this? And then you look at each other and say, do we have enough to do that right now? Is this something that we can do? Then maybe, yeah. Look at the strengths and weaknesses of your group and really discern, is that something we can do? But the main focus in the Franciscan order is seriously growing in holiness and getting to spend forever in heaven with God. That's number one. Number one is loving God. And number two is like the first because it's an overflow of it, okay? It's an overflow. If you're really loving God, you should be at peace with yourself, right? And then those other things will come. And nobody's going to be doing that perfectly when they come in. That's why we have all the brothers and sisters in the order. As well as while it talks about an over-reliance on religious, I want to say the original seculars were drawn to friaries. They were drawn around the convents, right? We were there for a reason. We were there for their guidance, to learn from their holiness, to model ourselves after them. And yes, we live it differently because we're living out in the world, but there's a reason, and we do need each other. We don't want to rely on them completely, like have them make all our decisions and things for us, but we really do need to have them around as our brothers and sisters and really live the Franciscan family. Those are my thoughts for today, friends. May God bless you and keep you. May He make His face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. And may the good Lord bless us all. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.